and not to improve upon it with time, then we'll talk about sustainability at that point. Is it clear? All right, let's see.
She has other fresher batteries.
So,
Is it working?
still not working? Sure. Yeah, so we can see that at this point, we can see that the two terms, depending on what your goal is, the people actually use them interchangeably, right? And this term started with Rundell Institute. Most of you have heard the popular person that we associate organic agriculture to. So when we look at this, we can see that it depends on your goal. If your goal is to keep the ecosystem productivity being increased with time, then you are being regenerative. You are rejuvenating the system that is degraded. So from degenerative to making sure that the support to the ecosystem is increasing. But if you want to increase it and maintain it at a point without the aim of increasing the capacity with time, then at that point you are being sustainable. You are just trying to sustain the system. So today we are going to see these practices, some of these practices that I use. Some of those, can we talk about some of the practices that I use in these two terms? If you want to sustainably practice on your farm, or if you want to do regenerative agricultural practices, what are some of the methods that you will use? I don't know whether it's a battery or it's a distance. Okay. What are some of the practices that you use on your farm if you want to be sustainable or regenerative to your approach of farming? Yes. Okay, composting, right? That's a good one. What was that? Oh, okay. Any more?
Seed harvesting.
Seed harvesting. How will you use seed harvesting to improve your ecosystem? Sorry.
I'm sorry?
How will you use seed harvesting to improve your ecosystem or your soil productivity?
I would look at it as not having to go elsewhere to get your seed.
Okay. That's right. So you produce your own seeds every year to make sure that you don't buy from other sources. In that case, we will look at it like you probably reduce the cost of production, right? And then increase your profitability. Okay, any more ideas? Ross, let's move the slide one step forward. Yeah, so when we look at these pictures here, we can see that we have no-till farming. Is one of the systems we can use to improve our system. And then also our partial and then organic annual cropping. Yeah. We have compost, someone mentioned compost, and then compost tea. We have biochar. How many of you have heard of biochar? Okay. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of these practices. And then, yeah, so these are some of the practices that we can use to improve our soils that has been degenerated because of human activities or the climate that we don't have so much control of, right? So when we look at, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so when we look at these four pictures here, we can tell which picture is being regenerative or sustainable, and then which is degenerative, right? So we can see that when we try to do bare soil tillage all the time, without any cover, leaving our soil bare without covering it, in that case, we are promoting degenerative of our system, we are degenerating it because of erosion, it could be wind, or water erosion, rain erosion. And also, when we look at the 2 pictures down, the practices that we do on our field will also lead to bad issues on our field or will help improve our field. So when we do no-till, that will help improve our system. And when we till the soil all the time, that will also help destroy the system somehow. Does it make sense? Some may argue that it's always not the case, but in most cases, this intensive cultivation is what is leading to the destruction of our ecosystems. And we'll look at how that happens when we get a little bit further. So agroforestry is also one of the systems. So agroforestry is like having different tree species together. It could be with perennials, annuals, could be with trees, and then also having your crops at the same time. So the pasture could also be having the trees and then animals at the same time. And then you also have the grazing has to do with those that do animal production, right? Why are we so much concerned about sustainability and regenerative agricultural practices, especially here in Arizona? So when we look at this map, we can see that Arizona is right there, right? Arizona is right there, we can see it. And when we look at the organic matter content in the soils for the whole of the country, we can see that Arizona is one of the places that has very low organic matter in our soils, right? So that means that the system by nature is already degenerated. It's already having a low capacity to support our ecosystem and then our agricultural productions. So we have every reason to look at sustainability approaches or regenerative approaches to improve the system to be able to support the ecosystem and then our productions. This picture you see on the other hand is, I took it from Cornville. So we have an experimental station there, and we have a lot of golfers also there. You can see the golfer holes, right? Those holes you see, let me see if I can get. So right there, this is a golfer hole right there. You see most of the golfer holes there. So the place is flooded. Flood irrigation, we know, is not very sustainable, right? So when you flood irrigate, the water is just going through the golfer holes and getting out from other places. So it led to like collapse. So this is not, I did not dig it. It's just a collapse by itself. Went to the field, saw that it was irrigated, and all we see is just the field collapse. And it could get like this. When I get in there, it's up to my stomach or chest level. And when we look at the profile, we see the color of the soil is just the same, bottom up, right? And with organic matter, we'll see that to be some dark spot. I'll show you in the next slide. You see how a soil profile should look like. Yeah, so with this kind of soils, we have low organic matter content in this soil, as is indicated in the map here. Which is the reason why we have to use practices that will help rejuvenate that soil to support the ecosystem in the first place and also our agricultural productions. Any question at this point? So some of the causes for this low organic matter could be inherent factors. So the inherent factors are climate and soil texture, which is as a result of soil formation, how the soil was formed. And then we also have excessive tillage and other on-site practices. So when we till the soil too much, that also leads to this kind of thing. So we have two main factors, inherent factors and then excessive utility practices, which is human activity. So the inherent factors, we don't have so much control over them. But for the human activities, what we do on the field, that we have control over. That's what we have to talk more about today. So the soil in itself is made up of two main components, right? The solid and then the pore space. So the solid is made up of the minerals and organic matter, and mostly a good soil has about 5%. If you have 5% organic matter in your soil, then your soil is very good. Yeah. But in Arizona, I think if you have even 2%, then you have very good soil. In most cases, it's very low, as we see from the map that I showed earlier. So when we take these two components, the other component, which is the pores, is air and then water. So depending on our soil properties, which we'll be talking a little bit about, the soil will be able to hold more water, or it will not be able to hold. When you put the water on field, it will just drain off or be washed away. So these two factors these three factors are very important. The air space, water holding capacity, organic matter are very important, as well as the minerals in supporting the ecosystem, because that's where the nutrition comes, that is where the soil health issues come. There are a lot of microorganisms in the soil that need air to live, to do their aerobic activities, and also some are anaerobic, but we have most aerobic. And also the soil, the plants need minerals to be able to work. So what I want us to discuss right here is the uses of soil. What do we use soil for? I think we talked about some of them already, right? Yeah, what do we use soil for? I mean, in the context of a farmer, we're in the farmer's class. When we are talking about the mason will see the use of soil different. The politician will see the use of soil different. Yeah. And for us as farmers, we also see the use of soil different. For the contractor who does the road, the soil we are interested in, that is not what they are interested in. They mostly get it up because it's not something that is beneficial to them. But for us, that is what is beneficial to us. So let's look at the uses of soil in the context of our discussion today. So what do we say are the uses of soil for us as farmers?
A growing medium.
Growing medium, that's good.
A house for all kinds of biological activity, everything from mycorrhizae to bacteria to fungi.
That's awesome. Any more? So you are not just thinking about growing medium you are thinking about other ecosystems. Okay. Okay, so basically the soil is a media, like you said, where a lot of microbial activities, biological activities go on. So when we talk about biological activities, it's plants, microorganisms, and both the micro and macro organisms, they all are in this, that's their habitat, right? But for us as humans, we benefit from those ecosystems. They use it as their habitat, and we also benefit from them, from their activities. The plant grows in the soil, we go harvest it, and that is our food, right? The other systems, the tree grows using the soil, go harvest the fruit. The microorganisms, they help mineralize, break down organic matter in the soil, make the soil more fertile. The plant is able to take up this nutrient that has been broken down by the microorganisms, grow well, and then we're able to depend on it. Yeah, so this is the soil profile, how it looks like compared to what we have. in Arizona. So definitely use, hopefully I can get this one as well. You see the pointer? Okay, let's look at the first part of the profile. You see that a good soil, this is how a good soil profile looks like. You have different coloration, and the topmost part is, which is mostly the UArizona, is the organic matter, where the organic matter layer is. Because the plant grows on the surface, it dies, and then it gets on the surface, and with time it breaks down and gets incorporated deeper and deeper. So at the topmost part, you have it to be mostly darker in color. And then when you go to the A, that is the subsoil. And then you get to the bedrock, which is the parent material. So depending on your climate, and depending on the region, and depending on the mineral materials and basic ones, the profile will be different. The depth of each layer will be different depending on the age of the soil and the activities that goes on the soil. And so what I would like us to discuss at this point is it's already there, right? The factors that influence soil formation. So we have the climate is one. As you can see, in Arizona, our organic matter content is very low, which is strongly related to our climate. It's very hot. And very hot means that mineralization is very fast. So when you put organic matter in the soil, it breaks down quicker compared to somebody who is in, which is the coldest part in the state? Alaska. So somebody in Alaska, if you put the same organic matter on the same soil, on the surface, or incorporate it the same amount in Arizona and in Alaska, the person in Arizona will have his or her organic matter breakdown being faster than someone in Alaska. Because the temperature levels helps to break those materials faster. Which is one of the reasons that we may have low organic matter content here. So we have to make a conscious effort to put in more organic matter into our soils. So putting in practices that will take out this organic matter from our soil is not going to be useful to us, it's not going to benefit us, it's going to be a disincentive for us, rather. And the other thing is organisms. So the organisms, the plants, the earthworms, the microorganisms that we cannot see, the mycorrhiza, the animal, the golfers. You remember the golfer? Oh, it's still here. They are all contributing to soil formation, right? So the activities help break down the rocks. The plant grows through. You can see that sometimes you have a very rocky place. Oh, okay.
Are you talking about the soil food web?
The soil food web is also, we can talk about it and integrate it here, but here we are talking about the soil formation. We are not talking about the cycle for feeding, right? So when we talk about the cycle for feeding, how we depend on one another, and then we can look at the food web. But here we're just looking at how the soil is formed.
But isn't that instrumental to how the soil is formed?
Yeah, it's a contributing factor because the feeding habits depend on one another lead to some of these activities. For example, the animals, their feeding habits lead to these activities. The microorganism is working the soil not because we want to work the soil and make it fertile for us to grow our crops. It's working the soil, eating the organic matter to feed itself. But by so doing, it helps break down organic matter and make more of the nutrient available for the plant to take up. And the plant is not taking up the nutrient because the plant has intention to feed human beings. The plant is taking it up because it's feeding itself. But feeding itself and growing better we as human beings see the fruit attractive to go and harvest it and eat. So that is where it's coming from.
Yeah, it's kind of sustainable.
That's right. That's right. So it contributes to that. So the organisms, when we want to associate to the food web, we can do that. But the main activity here is that the activities of each organism is contributing to the soil formation. When you see, sometimes you see a rock, just a crack, but tree grows through it, you see the roots going through the cracks and helping to break down those rocks even more further. And those breaks down lead to the soil formation with time, which is, and also the topography of the land. When you look at the nature of the landscape also contributes. If it is slope, if it is more of a slope, you see that at the top part is more fertile, but at the bottom of the slope is more fertile. Because when it rains or when it's windy, it's easy to carry the organic material and those little particles to the bottom part, leaving the top part, which is always washed off, to be still thinner, right? So mostly when you have a steep slope, you find out that at the bottom of the slope, the soil is more fertile than at the top part of the slope. And then when we look at the last thing is the parent material. So parent material, depending on the rock, the type of rock that is at a specific location, that also influences the type of soil that we have. And also the fertility of the soil. And then time. So depending on the age, so the soils in Africa are more of like long span, and they are more deeper and degraded than the soils here. In other, like the tropics, subtropics, and this. So when you look at locational with time, depending on the time frame, the soil fertility will also be influenced with time. So in short, you can call it CLORGT, which is mostly, so the CL stands for the climate, and then the O stands for organism, R for the relief or the landscape topography, and then the P for parent material, and then T for time. Any question at this point? Okay, so we look at the soil texture. Depending on how the soil is formed, can we define what soil texture is? Do we still remember what they taught us in the primary school or basic school? Okay.
The soil texture is the physical properties, right?
Mm-hmm. The physical properties. Okay. Yeah, physical properties. Any more ideas? Okay, so you see this diagram here. You see that we can see clay, we can see silt, we can see loam silt, we can see sand, right? The two main soil types that we have, it's silt, clay, and then sand. Okay, and you can see that at each side we have percentage of clay here, percentage of silt, and then at the bottom we have percentage of sand. So soil texture is a percentage of how much silt or sand, and then how much silt, sand, and clay we have in that particular soil. Does it make sense? So depending on the percentage of each of these three, we'll be able to call it either a silty loam soil, loamy, clay, or whatever. So when you look closely, here, you have just sand here, because when we look at the sand component, it's 100% here, and clay is just 10%. So you have more of sand in this area. So you can call this soil here as sandy soil, right? And then when we go to the other side here, we have silt is right here, 100% here, and then sand is just 10%. So when we have a soil that has almost about between 90 to 100% of silt and just 10% of sand, we can call that soil as a silty soil. And when we go in the middle somewhere, here now, you can see we have between 50 to 60% of what? Sand, and then about 20-30% of clay, and then we have also about 8% of what? The silt. And that is loamy soil. Right? So depending on the percentage of silt, sand, and clay, you'll be able to say your soil texture is this or that. And how we can measure that, we have several methods that can be used to measure that. And one of those methods, we can use this one here. We can use this. This is a sieve. So when you open this, because of COVID, I would have passed it through for everyone to see how it looks like. But anyway, I can still pass it through. I taped it. So when you open this, we have 5 sieves here. Yeah. Each of those sieves has a different sieve. The mesh, the size of the mesh is different. Yeah. So the biggest mesh is at the top, and it follows that, and then the smallest is at the bottom here. Okay. So the sand particles are bigger, and the silt particles are the clay particles are the most fine particles. Okay. So when I come to your field, pick your soil samples, I can use this to determine how much percentage of sand you have, how much percentage of silt you have, how much percentage of clay you have. And then I'll compare it to this graph here, and then I'll be able to tell you that your soil is either silty loamy soil or sandy soil. Does it make sense? This we do it in the lab. I mean, you can also buy this and use it too, but you only need to do it maybe once. Not so frequent, so you may not have to spend so much money to do that.
What do you call that?
So this is just a sieve, soil texture sieve that you can get online to buy. We can also use a jar. The jar test is the one at the bottom. It's similar to this, but the only difference is that we're using water or some other detergent to help dissipate the particles. And you'll be able to tell, so you can see here that you have the most biggest particles, which is the sand, so it's the reverse to the sieve, because the biggest particles will go to the bottom of the jar when you shake it well in the soil, right? So you can tell, when you use a jar, you can tell how much percent of sand you have, you can tell how much percent of silt and then clay. And then based on that, you can compare it to the map and then tell what type of soil you have, which can be done. You just use any transparent jar and you can get this done. You can also use the Rubin test. So you moist the soil, get it as much as possible. If you're able to roll it completely, if you can roll it like roll as in the first instant here, you see it's clay, because clay is more sticky. Because it's more sticky, you'll be able to roll it and make a long rod out of it. But if it is not able to go that long, up to maybe it's just below 50, then you can say it's what? It's clay loam. But if you can roll it up to somewhere around close to 75, 70, then you can say that it's clay. right? Means you are not able to, no matter how moist you are able to do the soil, you can't roll it that long. Okay? Any question at this point? So this is how we can determine our soil texture both in the lab and field. Now let's look at what soil structure is. So the soil structure is telling us the aggregate, yeah, how the soil is meshed together. So when we look at this, the number one here, this side here, the first one here, so the whole of this is called an aggregate. This is an aggregate. So it's made up of individual particles that are held together. Okay? And the individual particles is not just sand, it has both sandstone and clay that are arranged into what is called an aggregate. So when you look at this here, you can see that you have the particle of sand, and then you also have the silt clay, humus particles, and then all these other things combined to have that aggregate. And you have air space as well, and then water, of course, should also be there. A good structure looks like this, like the one on the right hand side at the top part. That is how a good soil structure looks like. Okay, you can still see the pores, the air space, and then that allow for water and air circulation within the soil profile nicely to keep the soil life going. But a poor soil structure looks like the one at the bottom right here. The pore spaces are all mostly close up, and you don't have enough pores for air and water movement. What are some of the practices that can cause a bad soil structure? To close up the air spaces for water movement. What are the practices? Okay.
Flood irrigation.
Flood irrigation, okay. Flood irrigation. Can just flood irrigation, that alone cause it? You flood too much, the soil is not able to hold, can only hold up to a particular point, which is called the water holding capacity of that soil. When you go beyond that, there's more pressure on the soil, and that can break down the structure. But that happens, okay, let's hear from you before. Compaction. Compaction is the number one of the biggest causes of bad soil structure. Okay? So when we talk about compaction, what are the causes of compaction? How can we compact our soils? Tractor? Is it tractor you said? Okay. But we all use tractor on our field. It doesn't mean all our fields are compacted. Livestock, okay. Yeah, so tractor, using heavy equipment in on the field, livestock, uncontrolled grazing. So when we are grazing, we have to make sure that our livestock, we are not overstocking them in a specific area. So there has to be, I'm not a livestock specialist, but there is a limit how much livestock you can have in a specific area. If it is too much, that can cause that, right? That's also why when you are having your beds, you have a specific precision agriculture comes in. You have a specific place where your tractor goes through all the time, and then the other places where your crops are, you leave those places without tractor moving there. So don't be moving your tractor everywhere in the field. You can demarcate specific spots where your tractor moves all the time, and those areas are going to be compacted, and other areas are going to be good, right? So that is one of the advantages of using a precision agriculture practices. But when we move our tractor everywhere in the field, that means that we are compacting the soil everywhere. And also, if you don't have enough organic matter at the top layer to serve as a cushioning, that is also making the whole thing worse, right? So these are some of the things that we can look at in controlling the soil structure. So when we look at the soil structure, we have them in different forms. So we can have the soil structure can be granular in form, and this some of the description can also be bulky, yeah, and prismatic in structure. And then we have columnar. And the columnar and then the prismatic look similar. The only difference is that you can see that the prismatic is vertical column of soil that might be a number of centimeters long, and it's usually found at the lower horizon, right? And then the columnar is a vertical column of soil that have salt in it, okay? And it's at the top part of it, right? So this is mostly at the location here, arid climate. The columnar is potential that we can have that kind of structure in our locations, semi-arid. What do we have to discuss now? The soil structure forms will allow easy movement of soil. Which of these will allow easy movement of water in the soil?
The single grain, the stems, soil.
The granular, you mean?
The single grain?
Oh, the single grain, okay. The single grain, okay. Someone mentioned single grain, okay. Any other idea? You agree with him? Okay, so we see that single grain is just the sandy soil. And if you look at the single grain, you don't have so much pores in there, right? But when you look at the granular, it has good pores that will help the water movement. But the single grains, it's also, so these two, in terms of water movement, the sandy soil, which is the single grain, will be more of faster water movement. So when you pour your soil, the water on the sandy soil, which is the single grain, it just washes away, right? Just go. Yeah, but this will be able to hold the water a little bit much longer. Yeah. Though the movement is not so fast, and it's also not so slow, it will be able to help hold the water longer. So when we talk about some of the lab testing that we do for soils, and this is the one right there. And the field where I show you the other picture, this is the field. I sampled it for soil analysis to do some soil map. Yeah. It's always good to have your soil test done before you start any activities on it. So when you're starting your farm, one of the first things you should be thinking about is having your soil test. Is there any reason for that? Can we tell why we should have the soil test before we do any activities on the field?
To see if the particular field we picked is even going to be good enough to grow our plants.
Okay, so to help us determine if the field is good enough to grow our plant, and even help us determine what type of plant that we have to grow. Okay, and the other thing is that if we have a baseline to see if our practices that we are having on the field is having a positive or negative impact on the soil. So if we don't have any baseline, we are not able to tell if we are making a good or bad impact to the soil. Yeah, the crops may be growing nice, but we may be doing some things that we don't recognize because we don't do the soil analysis. We didn't have any baseline to compare. And it's good to have soil analysis maybe once or twice, at least 3 times every 2-3 years. You have soil analysis on your field to see So you can compare to the baseline and tell if there is any positive or negative impact that is going on. Yeah, so this is a soil sample analysis from Texas A&M. So you can tell that this soil, one thing I like about their text is that it gives you a very good picture of even the recommendations, right? So you see this line here, this thick dash line right there, the CL, you see that? So that's the critical point. That is where you want your, I mean, you cannot have everything to be where you want it to be. That's one thing about soil analysis, yeah? But once you are within this range, this is pretty good soil. Though the phosphorus level is a little bit high, nitrogen level is low, we can see. So nitrogen, the recommendation here is just 1.1 pounds per 100 square feet. See? And then when we look at the other thing that is of concern may be calcium. This is soil from Arizona. Yeah, so having high calcium is not surprising. Right? So it's a pretty good soil. The pH is also a little bit high, but it could be bad. Yeah, the field right there. This test is actually not from this field. This field, the soil pH is around 8.1. Now you want your pH to be within 6.5 and then around 7.5. That is a range where you have most of the nutrients being available. I'll show you a graph later on that tells you the range of pH that have most of the nutrients availability. Yeah, so this is how you can do your soil testing in the lab. You can do all the mineral components done. You can also do the soil aggregation, the organic matter, and all this other stuff for you. There is a lab here in Phoenix that does that also. IAS lab also does all this analysis. So you can look, if you want to do analysis, why I like this, they are more cheaper. Then you can look them online and then send your soil samples to them for analysis. You can sample with a probe. The probe, we like it to be fancy, so we use a probe, like I'm doing there. But you can use your hole. They have, on their website, they have a description of how to sample the soil as well. So we can have that done. So this is the soil and the sample. See the pH. This is the soil that I actually sampled there. This section here. So you see 8.1, that's from the field that I was in there. And this is for great formation, zeolite, and then Pochimano. So you can do all sort of analysis in the lab to determine your material before you use it. So determine the material also help you to do your calculation if you want to be precise in application. Yeah, so at this point we can see that in Arizona here is a big concern, right? To be thinking about soil health and things like that. So when we look at the trends in Arizona in terms of soil health practices, we can see that there is a very good trend of soil health practices in Arizona. So when we look at the no-till, we can see from 2012 to 2017, about 103% increase in the use of no-till, and reduced till 71%. You see cover crops 123%, and then manure 30%. So there is an increase. People are making more conscious effort to increase their soil health profiles, and it's good to hear that. It's good to see some of these things, right? Yeah. So let's look at the local level where I'm working. So Northern Arizona, I did a need assessment when I came, and we can see that the trend is similar there. Yeah. You can see that the land use practices, no-till is up to about 20% of the farmers are using no-till, reduced to about 18%. Intensive till, you see, they are not interested in that anymore. Farmers are not interested, they are not using the intensive till anymore. And one reason may be that they are mostly small-scale farmers who do not have heavy equipment, so they tend to use these practices and not the intensive systems as we find in other places. And then the cover cropping, about 25%, and crop rotation also there. And when you look at the soil amendment, they use more compost, right? Compost is number one soil amendment that they use, followed by animal manure, green manure, and this other stuff. Yeah. So I'm showing these graphs just to encourage you to see how people are conscious about, interested in these practices, right? And the cover crop practices, this is a greenhouse cover crop trial. Most of them have greenhouses, and they are using cover crop. They are doing cover crops in the greenhouse. So this particular farmer, he had an issue with soil-borne disease. So he called me and said, oh, I have an issue with what plant? I think it was one of these flower plants. It was dying off. So the recommendation we made to her after doing lab analysis identified soil-borne pathogens. It was in the lab of Yuma, Bindu's lab that did that. Yeah. So we recommended soil health practices. So she put in the cover crops, and this year the cover crops are doing good. The other plants are doing good. She did not see those diseases as issues anymore. So just to tell you a little bit importance about cover crops, so we discuss a little more. And when we are doing the cover crops in the greenhouse, it's a little bit different because you are not able to use heavy equipment to incorporate into the soil. So you want to be cautious about the timing when you terminate it. If not, it will become an issue for you to be able to terminate it. And you also have to be selective on the type of cover crop you use. If you go and grow, like millet and stuff that and allow it to grow so big, it may be a challenge to terminate it. Yeah. So this was done to help the farmers determine the timing that is good for them to incorporate their cover crops back into the soil in the greenhouse. So you can see that around 5 weeks, maybe if you go around 6-7 weeks, it should be enough to terminate this particular cover crops. Yeah. This was buckwheat. Yeah, it was buckwheat, and then cowpea and ted grass. It was these three crops that was. Yeah, so using cover crops, just one single cover crop is not good enough. Having a diversity is good. Yeah. And I'm using this picture because when you look at the root systems, you can see that each of the crops is growing, the depth of the root is different, right? So if you're using just one, you'll not be able to harness. For example, if you're using the pea, you're just at the top there. Or the fig, you're just at the top. You're not able to get to the bottom. And in most cases, we have nitrate issues, or nitrate is very mobile. And when we water heavily, it's easy for it to be washed down. So we need, if you're putting cover crop, we need like deep roots to be able to get that nitrate out back, so that our crops can use it. Yeah. Let me explain something here. What is the difference between cover crop and catch crop? Is there any difference between them? Cover crop and then the catch crop. So it's depending on your goal. If your goal is that I have too much nutrient in the soil for this season, I want to to hold it and prevent it from leaching so that the next season crop can benefit from it. Then you plant the crops that will catch those nutrients and hold it from leaching. So during the next season when you're ready to plant your main crop, you incorporate that into the soil and then you plant. So that your next crop can still have access to the nutrient that was left from last season. If you don't do that in areas where they have heavy rains, that may lead to leaching. They may, for example, like the nitrate can leach to deeper layers that your next season crop cannot have access to. So in that case, you are having a catch crop. The goal is to catch the nutrient that is already in the soil and to keep it there for the next season crop. But if your goal is to improve the soil fertility using leguminous plants or using the free-living fixing cover crops that will fix free-living nitrogen, in that case, it's a cover crop you're using, right? But if you depart from the goal of catching the fertile, you know that your soil is still fertile and there are more nutrients they want to hold in. If your goal is not that and it's that you want to just improve the system in general, then it becomes a cover crop, right? So it depends on your goal that you are putting the crop in, which will determine whether you call it a cover crop or a catch crop. But you can interchangeably use them. No one will hold you responsible for saying catch crop. All right, so we can go ahead. So the reason why we have to put multi-species is that diversity is good. Diversity is good. Even as a farmer, being diverse and producing different kind of crops is good for you, for profitability and your soil health. When we're doing cover crops, it's also the same thing. Each crop is able to attract different kind of microorganisms to itself. So the level of microorganisms, the type of microorganisms that maize will attract, pea will attract a different kind. Yeah, so if you have a diversity, it helps increase your microbial profile in the soil. Yeah, the other thing is that each of them grows different depths, right? So it helps the crop to make use of the nutrients at different depths. Yeah. So the nutrient that is maybe some of your nitrate from the last season leached. So if you have like deep-rooted cover crop maize, those deep-rooted ones will be able to bring back the leached nitrate up into the top layer for your next season crop to use it. And then the other ones, like the leguminous ones, also have fixed nitrogen and things like that. Yeah, so it's good to have like diversity in your cover cropping than just one species. So what are some of the criteria that you use in selecting a cover crop or catch crop? I think we already discussed some of them, right? What criteria would you use to select a cover crop? Yeah.
Well, you got to know what season you're growing it in, hot weather, cool weather.
That will determine whether you're using full season cover crop or warm season, right?
If you're in if you're in Eloy and it's 110 or 15, you might want some sorghum Sudan grass.
Okay. That's a good point. Okay. Any other criteria that we can use? You want to tell us something? Oh, your hand is up. Okay. Yeah. I know you're all putting in cover crops in your fields, those of you who have farms. So what criteria did you use before selecting a cover crop to put in there? Or you just planted anything? If you just planted anything, you can say, so that I just planted it. I didn't use any criteria.
You mean like nitrogen fixers?
So if you are planting nitrogen fixer, why did you decide to use nitrogen fixer?
Possibly because the previous crop used the nitrogen.
So previous crop used the nitrogen. You maybe you predicted or you assumed or you made a test and realized that your nitrogen levels were low and you want to increase and add leguminous crops, that will help fix nitrogen, right? So right now, the criteria you are using is that you want to increase your nitrogen portfolio in the soil. So now you select leguminous crops to help you increase that, right?
Yeah, you already said it's not the profile.
Oh, okay, that's it. Okay. Any more? Yeah, so these are some of the criteria. So the importance of cover crops are listed here. Serve as a fallow period, okay? We know what fallow period is. Taking a vacation, giving your field a vacation. Okay? Yeah, so fallow period is like we work, just as humans, we work all the time and then we have like 2 weeks or something vacation, we go and have fun. And then not working, not stressing ourselves and come back and then we're rejuvenated, we'll be able to, the first week we're able to do more, right? After vacation. Just work, more fresh. So it's the same thing. When the soil is being cultivated all the time, it needs a break. So you give the soil a break without putting any cash crop in there. So instead of leaving it bare and open, you put your cover crop there and then allow the soil to rejuvenate. So you bring a mixture of different diversity crops to rejuvenate the place. So it's not for you to make profit at that point, it's for you, it's a reason to allow, rejuvenate and revitalize the soil. So you're not putting your cash crop in there, you're putting a cover, you can decide to put in a cover crop. Okay. And then also add organic matter, like I said earlier, we have low organic matter content. So maybe your goal is that, okay, now I have 0.5 organic matter content in my soil. In the next 10 years, I want to have 2%. Okay? So you consciously put cover crops in there when you are not having your cash crop. So maybe you do cool season cash crop, and then you do warm season cover crop, or you do the vice versa. Or once in a while, you can have a rotation. We'll talk about the rotation later. You can have a rotation and put your cover crop in there. So once in a while, you have your cover crop. Okay, so soil aeration improvement and then water infiltration. So as the root grows deeper, when the root die, it leaves a pore, right? So now when you put your water on the soil, those root pores, those traces where the root was going and now is dead, the water can use those as channels to get through and they also serve as air space now. So your soil now have more air space from the dead root, which will serve as channels for the water to easily move through. So when it rains or when you irrigate your field, the water is not just flooded and going away, it sits there and percolate nicely. Percolation is the downward movement of water. So it sits there and then it's able to move through the soil profile nicely. So it increases aeration and then water infiltration. And then increase life and biodiversity of the soil. That's said already. And yeah, those serve as pollinator habitats. You see bees and other insects that will pollinate some of your crops all over the place. So if you want other resources, these 2 links can give you 2 other cover crop resources that you can use. So some of the control, the erosion, this is just to demonstrate the erosion control of cover crops and then the soil cover. So you can see that here, the first picture, the number 1, the first one here is the main soil without any cover. It doesn't have any dead material at the top and it doesn't have any cover crop also, right? So when you irrigate your field, this is how it looks like. You see how muddy the water is? That muddiness is some particles of the soil. It's carrying away your soil particles, right? But when you have like dead materials, your cover crop that is dead, or you harvested your crop and you did not burn it, you not carry it away. When it rains or when you water it, you see how clean the water is, and when you put cover crop, you also see how clean the water is. That means that it's not able to carry your soil particles away, so it controls erosion. So this is similar to the NRC also has a rainfall simulator that is similar to this. Maybe some of you have seen that. Yeah, so now we'll talk about diversified cropping. When we talk about diversified cropping, we're talking about having more than one crop at a time. This is from one of my growers, Schaefer Farms. He is a big fan of diversified cropping systems. And in this greenhouse, last week he harvested more than 1,000 pounds of green vegetables, leafy greens from this small space. Yeah. Okay. So the crop rotation, we can talk about crop rotation as well. So we can have this 4-year rotation or 3-year rotation. And one principle about the rotation is that make sure you have diversity as well, like we said in the cover crops. Don't follow the same family in the subsequent year. Should be plant of different families should follow one another. And then also the hydrogen, nitrogen consuming, high nitrogen consuming should follow less nitrogen consuming, and this goes so this is the other importance we can see for crop rotation here. So now I want to talk about organic matter content. This is manual application. One thing I wanted to talk about this is the bleaching, which I already spoke about. So I'll skip this a little bit. So let's talk about composting. Yeah. So composting is one of the ways we can use to break down the materials and make them more usable. And what are some of the importance of using compost? It helps reduce pathogen in our soils and also the seeds that may germinate in our soil. When we compost, we can kill them. Right. So we see that in using compost is a good way to be more efficient in the field because we reduce introducing weeds to our field, and then we also may reduce the pathogen concerns in the fields as well. I'll skip this now. Yeah, so this is so that leads us to food safety concerns because we're using more of like manure and other things. Food safety is a concern. So there is this class, which is the Produce Safety Alliance class that you can take online. And if you go to this website, you'll be able to take this class, and that will inform you more about what to be concerned about in terms of food safety and water, compost, and then manure usage. Yeah. Normally when you put manure there, it should be, if it is vegetable, it should be 120 days before you can harvest it. And if it is like grains where the plant is not having direct contact with the soil, 90 days before you can harvest it. Yeah. To avoid this pathogen salmonella and E. coli issues. Yeah, so this, I wanted to show you this quickly, which is the pleasures of using grape pomace in our field. Grape pomace is the waste from the wine growers and then the wineries that can be used to reduce our soil pH. So this is the grape pomace here. You can see the second picture here, it has a grape pomace. The second row, 5% of grape pomace is in that soil. And when we compare to the soil without any fertilization, you can see that the grape pomace is able to induce maize and wheat growth. And let's look at the soil pH measurements. You can see that grape pomace, that is the second row here, is able to reduce the soil pH at this point, here 5% and 10, 20%. You can see that the more you put it there, it has a good ability to reduce the pH. Yeah, and when we look at the poultry manure, it's also a little bit like this, kind of more stable. And then this was the graph that I wanted to show you about. You see the range where mostly the nutrients are more available in your pH. So if it's within 6.5, 7 there about, most of your nutrients are more available at that point. So that's where you want to target to work your soil pH so that you don't have too high soil pH or too low soil pH. This is just a graph to show you the microbial diversity, how the grape pomace affected the microbial diversity. You You can see that it increased the fungus, total fungus, and then also the saprophytic. They feed on dead material, so it's just yeah. So the microbial biomass is how the microorganisms help mineralize the organic matter. It eats up the organic matter, and then when the microorganisms die, they make the nutrient more available to the plant. Yeah. So the addition of grape pomace was able to use microbial biomass in all these microorganisms. So the more you add organic matter to your soil, you increase the microbial portfolio, and then as the microbes feed and die, they make the minerals more available to your soil and plants. So in summary, we can say that the relationship to measure whether your soil is in good health or not, indicators, you can look at the organic matter content, you can look at the physical, which is the soil structure, we discussed that as well, and then you can look at the soil depth, whether you have some compaction or not. And then you can look at physical, chemical properties too, such as pH, electrical conductivity, and then the biological activity, the biomass, the one I showed you earlier. That is the microbial biomass. That will also be an indicator of the soil health profile. Yeah, so just to touch a little bit, I think I have 1 minute. Yeah, let's touch a little on soil-borne diseases. So if our soil is healthy, there is a less likelihood to have diseases in our soil, but if our soils are not healthy, that promotes these soil-borne diseases. So the more we make conscious effort to keep our soil healthy, we will be able to avoid some of these soil diseases. And the control measures are mostly restore back the microbial diversity in your soil, and then plant resistant varieties. You select varieties that are more resistant to soil-borne diseases to plant there, and you'll be able to overcome that. And also make sure you plant a well-nourished, nourish your plants, but make sure they are well fertilized with nutrients that are required. Grafting will also be, you graft susceptible and resistant. You have the stock that is more susceptible, you can bring this other stock to graft on there. And then you have soilization is using plastic to cover your soil, right? Cover your soil with plastic and allow the heat to maybe about 60 days to just heat up your soil, and that will help control the soil-borne. This can be done mostly in the greenhouses as well, and also during the summer when it's very hot. Hydroponic is one, of course, you don't use soil. So yeah, so this is one of the examples for Texas rot, which is mostly common here, the cotton rot. So the host is mostly dicotyledonous plants, and it's not able to attack roots. And the easiest way is to just keep your soil well healthy. Thank you for the time. If there are any questions, we can handle it. I think I'll spend the time, right? Okay. All right. Any questions? We are all good?